There's something about a good conversation that brings people together. From sustainability to morality, public health to politics, we all benefit from learning more about everything that is important to our shared community. So I've created a space for exactly that. Here, I gather some of our brightest minds, up-and-comers, and members of many different communities to talk about what's important to them, to explore the nuances in their perspectives, and ultimately, to learn how what they're doing will help bring people together and change our world for the better. This is Bottomless Coffee with Jerome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to Bottomless Coffee with Jerome. On this show, we have great conversations that leave us feeling inspired and empowered to make the world around us just a little bit better. Today, we're talking with Dixie Treichel about queer media, the radio station KFAI, and the audio documentary Fresh Fruit, 35 Years of Queer Radio. Welcome, Dixie. How are you?
Hello, Jerome. I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm really excited for this conversation. Back in the green room, we were talking and I kept saying, oh, wait, save it for the cameras. So I know we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Right.
But let's keep first things first.
Okay.
How did you get started with KFAI?
Well, I moved to Minneapolis in, I guess it was late 97.
Okay.
And I got a job working at the Bryant Lake Bowl Theater.
Okay.
I'd been doing theater before that. And there I met a woman named Lee Combs. And we were talking about stuff, weird music and all this stuff. And she said, oh, I'm doing a radio show on KFAI. Do you want to come and play some music on my show? So I did. And really, really enjoyed it. Did that with Lee for a while. And then decided to, take the exam to be an engineer myself.
Oh.
And started doing some hosting myself and just stayed doing that over the years.
Now, I didn't realize I should have introduced you as engineer Dixie Treichel. I apologize for that.
Well, producer, engineer, host, all of them.
All of the above.
Yeah.
All the hats.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about KFAI just as a station?
Sure. KFAI is a community radio station. And it began in 1978, May 1st, went on air. Now, they started making the plans back in 73, but they didn't finally get to go on air until 78.
Okay.
And all through the years, it's still going, 44 years.
Yeah.
And, it's for the community. It's to give underrepresented voices a chance to be heard on air, bring on guests from the different communities. There's a wide variety of communities that are represented on KFAI.
Yeah.
And probably over a dozen languages that the shows are done in. So it's, social justice, community involvement, underrepresented represented voices. And it's just wonderful. I mean, I've loved it.
Now, has that been the mission since the beginning, to
Yes.
your knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
It had been going for about 20 years before you moved to Minneapolis and were invited to do a show, right?
Yeah, I guess 1978. Yep, 20 years.
So what was your show about, your first one?
My very first show, well, it was probably playing music for Lee.
Okay.
So I don't remember exactly, what the details of it were. But I remember, liking to play unusual and different music. And as I stayed hosting over the years, I started to collect music that was written by LGBT folks or had LGBT lyrics in the songs.
Okay.
Which is really hard to hear. I mean, that's very underrepresented. You hear about a few people, like maybe Melissa Etheridge, Katie Lang, or whatever, Boy George, or whatever. But usually their lyrics don't have any queer content.
Yeah.
So I started, collecting music that actually had some queer content in it as well.
Now, okay, can you recall how you were hearing about these artists? Because surely you weren't, listening to all of the music available at the time and
Right.
like with a pen and paper,
Yeah.
Were people just bringing it to you? Were they calling in?
I probably did get a few, suggestions. I think the biggest influence on me was a guy named J.D. Doyle,
Okay.
who had a show in Texas that was called Queer Radio Heritage, I believe.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I can't quite remember the name of his show.
Sure.
Queer Music Heritage. Anyway, he was an avid collector of LGBT music. And I did find this on the web when I was doing research.
Sure.
I specifically started researching, for queer content, queer music. And his website was just marvelous.
Huh.
He's not doing that anymore, but it was just wonderful. And through that, then I got my name on his website so that people could send me music.
Okay.
So people that went to his website then would start sending me music. So I started collecting, the music that they would send me.
Yeah.
And playing the various artists and just doing more research, of course. But
Well, I'm wondering if you shouldn't start a similar website, because when I'm looking for music or trying to find music for like just me and my husband, like on a road trip,
Yeah.
it might be nice to have some gay love songs playing, gay love song radio
Yeah.
for date night or something. But you can't really when I've tried just putting it into Google Music or something, I haven't had it populate in the algorithm. So think about that. Now tell me about Fresh Fruit.
Well, Fresh Fruit is the longest running queer weekly radio program in the country. And Fresh Fruit got started in 1977
Okay.
when some guys who were in a queer hippie commune wanted a project to do.
Okay.
And they heard that somebody was starting a radio station.
Okay.
And they asked if they would have a gay radio show, and they said sure. So,
But okay, I want to make sure I have my dates right, because
Right.
I think it sounds like Fresh Fruit started before KFAI.
they started doing research. Yep.
Okay.
They started putting out ads for people to be involved in the radio station
Gotcha.
in like 77, and then it actually went on air in 78.
Okay.
So they had to, get a lineup and prepare and everything.
Yeah.
So these guys started doing all this research, to put together a gay radio show. And some of them went to the Anita Bryant
Yeah.
thing that was happening around. There was a lot of stuff going around with anti-LGBT stuff at the time. And so Fresh Fruit went on air on May 11th of 1978.
Okay.
Just 11 days after the station went on air.
And it's still on the air to
And
this
it's
day.
still on the air. Yep. We're 43 years now. We'll be on air 44 years come May 11th.
So if I tune in to Fresh Fruit, let's say this Thursday, what might I hear?
Well, here's the great thing about Fresh Fruit is that it's every Thursday. And every Thursday has different hosts.
Oh.
And it's pretty much been that way for a long time, not at the very beginning when there wasn't anybody. But what we like to do is have a variety. So we cover the wide variety
Yeah.
of the queer community and, involve as many voices as possible. Now, on the first Thursdays is Quinn Villagomez.
Okay.
And so let's see, where are we? Yeah, that would be the next one probably. So that would be Quinn.
Well, people might be watching this at any time, so we won't know.
And, we all cover a wide variety of topics. Quinn likes to cover queer, trans, people of color
Okay.
is basically her main thing. And then the second Thursday is Quinn along with Roxanne Anderson.
Okay.
Roxanne's been on for a long time too. She's one of the early hosts from the 90s. And then the third Thursday is myself.
Woo.
me. And I used to have a co-host, John Townsend, who was with me for 19 years. And then he passed away a couple of years ago.
19 years. Wow.
Yeah, he was my co-host for 19 years.
What a legacy.
And then now the fourth Thursday, we've got Alfred Walking Bull.
Okay, hold on, because you told us that you were there on the third Thursdays, but you didn't tell us what you do. Is it still weird music, or is it?
Oh, I do a wide variety of things. I always try to do interviews, although I do some music specials from time to time.
Okay.
I do like to do like music show specials on a topic of maybe queer musicians who some people don't know about or they don't get to hear a lot. Like I did one on Alberta Hunter.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
I did one on some of the queer pioneers of electronic music.
Okay, I love
like John
it.
Cage, Pauline Oliveras, Wendy Carlos, people like that.
It kind of sounds like you'd be educating me
Yeah.
on some music roots.
Yeah, there's really a lot I think that people aren't familiar with. But I do usually try to have a guest or two and talk about, maybe what's coming up for them and what's going on in the community or, what they're doing in the LGBT community. And then I'll always have, 2 or 3 songs that are included in the show.
Okay.
But usually I don't do like just a music show.
Okay. Now, KFAI and Fresh Fruit have been going on for quite some time, several decades. Most recently, with the rest of us, you encountered COVID-19. How did COVID-19 change your service model? I guess we can even stick just with the way you worked on Thursdays with Fresh Fruit.
Well, I mean, in general, it was just really an unfortunate thing because we couldn't have any live guests.
Yeah.
So that meant doing interviews, by phone or Zoom or whatever. And, it worked. I still could have guests on and whatnot, talk about topics, but I really missed having people come in live to the studio.
Yeah.
And it really affected the whole station too, because, normally there's like a hubbub of people moving around. There's a whole bunch of people, and it just kind of like went, just kind of like died. But
you were able to continue.
Oh yeah, we were all able to continue doing it, either going into the studio live by ourselves, or you could do a pre-record and have them, play a pre-recorded show if necessary.
So when you're on a typical week, you say there are a lot of people there. Is it like celebrities? Is it a lot of locals? Is it a mix?
Well, it's definitely different now than it was at one point, before that. But it usually was community people. People were coming in. We've got like several studios where you can pre-record your show if you need to. We've got a music library. Maybe you're editing a piece, so you could go into the editing suites. There's staff. There would be volunteers answering the front phone at the front desk, stuff like that. And, when COVID happened, it just all stopped.
Yeah.
And it still hasn't really picked up to its fullest. So,
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, there's a few people back, but not, as much as it was.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll come back. Let me ask you, we'll turn a little bit to your audio documentary, Fresh Fruit, 35 Years of Queer Radio. Why don't we let you speak on your own audio documentary first? Tell us about it.
Okay. At KFAI, there is a show called Mini Culture, and they like to give people an opportunity to do stories about arts, culture, and history. And it can be a short thing, or in some cases, it can be a longer documentary. So I was interested in learning how to do an audio documentary, and I'd done a couple. And during my term of doing that, I was thinking, gosh, I'd like to do one on Fresh Fruit, because I knew it had been around for a while. Mm-hmm. And I kind of thought I knew who some of the early hosts were, in the early years before I was there. I'd heard a few names floating around. And then out of the blue, I get an email from this guy who says, I just saw fresh fruit, on the web, and I was one of the original hosts, and I can't believe you guys are still going after 35 years.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, is that serendipity or what?
Yes.
And his name was Ted Fagel. He was one of the original hosts. And I contacted him by email, and I said, wow, this is something. And then I thought, well, okay, this is a good start, And I said, I'd like to do a documentary on this. And I pitched it to the manager of the Mini Culture Project, and she said, okay, you can have like a half an hour. Okay. And I just started doing research. I asked Ted to tell me everybody he remembered from the very beginning there in 1977. He was part of the Queer Hippie Commune.
Okay.
And
a little jealous I missed the commune era.
Yeah, I know. I love that. And so, he told me people, it just kind of spiraled, from this to this. I knew a couple of people that had been it before me. So then I contacted them. Some of them were still living in Minneapolis at the time. Ted was not.
Sure.
And I started collecting names. And then I said, well, let's set up an interview and, tell me everything you remember.
Yeah.
Oh
my gosh.
Then this one guy says, oh, I donated a whole bunch of tapes to the Treader collection. And I said, wow, excellent, So I went over there and I started digging through. There's some KFAI files there.
Oh, well, what is the Treader collection?
Oh, the Treader collection is an archival library at the University of Minnesota. That's where it lives. Started by Jean Nicholas Treader. And Jean, thanks to Jean, we have this amazing queer library here that I think a lot of people don't even know about.
Yeah.
Now, it's an archival library, so you can't check things out.
Oh.
But you can go there and do research.
Okay.
It's really more for a research thing and for saving these articles. He started collecting LGBT things like, back in the 60s. And he started saving everything. Because,
He's like a hoarder, but in a good way.
Programs to activities, protest flyers, things that at the time people didn't keep. They would throw away because they were afraid if somebody found it with them, they'd be arrested.
Right.
So, he started collecting everything and, saving, our history. I mean, it was incredible that he's got what he did, and he started saving it in his apartment. And finally, he had so much stuff in his apartment.
Oh my gosh.
He didn't have anywhere to go. There was one little tiny space for him to lay on. And somebody said, Gene, you got to find somewhere to keep this library.
I made a joke about hoarding, but now I'm regretting that.
Yeah. So luckily, they found a place at the University of Minnesota in the Elmer L. Anderson Library.
Yeah.
And it's there today, and they kept collecting their stuff from all around the world now, not just Minnesota.
I want to dive into kind of the details of the production of your documentary, but I want to maybe cap off this first part of our conversation with a big picture. So what do you feel you took away from the documentary after you produced it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was just amazing to know that there were these people who wanted to do a queer radio show, who wanted to represent the queer community from their perspective, and who wanted to have a radio show from a queer perspective.
Yeah.
Because, so often we hear people talk about queer folk, but it's, often straightwashed.
Yeah.
So that was just amazing. And not only that it kept going. It's people would say, well, I can't do the show anymore. And then somebody else would step in, else would step in, and over the years, it just has kept going. And it's just 44 years. That's amazing to me.
It's incredible what community can do when we work together.
That's right.
Now, before we go to coffee break, I do realize that I interrupted you as you were talking about Alfred Walking Bull's fresh fruit
Well, Alfred's one of the hosts on the fourth Thursday of
Okay.
Fresh Fruit. And then he's got a couple of other co-hosts that are relatively new, Tom and Lee.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's those three guys are on the fourth Thursday.
Wonderful. I feel like I threaded that needle quite nicely. Let's take a quick coffee break, and when we come back, we'll dive a little bit more into the production of Fresh Fruit, 35 Years of Queer Radio.
All right.
I am a mother of three. I'm from Puerto Rico, but been in the Midwest since 1994. I have three beautiful children, one a 20-year-old trying to figure out adulthood. Then I have a 14-and-a-half-year-old in Northeast Middle School. And my little one got drilled how important it is to keep everybody safe. I suffer from type 2 diabetes, hypothyroidism, so my immune system is compromised, and I'm overweight, as you can tell. So my little daughter started telling me, Mommy, please get the vaccination. I don't want you to die. You need to go to my graduation. You need to do this. And I told her, I'm going to do this for my kids. I really, at that point, to be honest with you, I was like, but I thought to myself, okay, I need to do this because all the reports and all the symptoms people are dying from, I don't want to be there. So when I got my vaccine, I was a little hesitant, but I noticed the next I didn't get sick at all, no symptoms like other people have experienced. My husband said, well, I don't see any horns or any tails coming up. I guess it's safe for me to have the vaccination. She even told me one day, Mom, you realize we're part of history? And it's like, oh yeah. He says, who knows? My name might be in one of those history books. I'm like, oh my God, where do you come from?
When you tend to your mental well-being, you're able to balance the positives and the negatives. You can celebrate the good and cope with the bad. What excites me the most about the work we do at Live More Screen Less is how it focuses on that balance. Our mission is about the balanced and intentional use of technology because we understand the good and the bad they can provide.
Live More Screen Less engages with school and community members to listen to the effects of screens on well-being and to provide positive and practical well-being resources and education to spark balanced and intentional use of devices.
KK Myers and I founded the organization in 2019. In 2021, a digital well-being law was passed to provide digital well-being awareness and education for all Minnesotans. The Minnesota Thrives community has contributed to our growth through contacts we've made through the webinars we've conducted as well as the webinars we've attended. And the Minnesota Thrives community has been a great tool for us to become more aware of all the incredible agencies and entities who are supporting mental well-being throughout the state.
Through Live More Screen Less's education, youth voice-centered initiatives, workshops, newsletters, and trainings, we are reaching Minnesotans of all ages to ensure we all have the tools and support to thrive in a digital age.
You are watching Bottomless Coffee with Jerome, and we're talking with Dixie Treichel from KFAI about the audio documentary Fresh Fruit, 35 Years of Queer Radio. So, I've never produced a documentary. So, what was the process like?
It was really fun. It was a lot of research and connecting with people, doing interviews.
Oh, okay.
Once I got, the list of names of people to contact, I'd contact and do an interview. Some came live into the studio if they were in town. Some were, via phone.
So that's right, you got lucky, and this person emailed you, and so that kind of just fell in your lap, right? That saved you probably a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so you interviewed him, and then the people that he suggested.
Well, he told me about who the early people were that worked with him.
Okay.
Now, these are the people that started in 1977 that I had no idea even existed.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know that. So the first person that I had been aware of was Claude Peck, who actually started right after them.
Oh.
He got involved with that group. And then, because there was a Fresh Fruit Collective then, they called themselves the Fresh Fruit Collective
Okay.
after Fresh Air Radio. And so then Claude started becoming a host, and then he got 2 more co-hosts. So he told me about those people that he worked with, and that would have been like the late 70s into the mid 80s.
Okay.
And then one of those that was Marge Snyder and Gary Peterson. And then Gary hung on a little bit longer and went into the 90s. And then there were new hosts that came in. So he told me about the new hosts that he had worked with. And it was just kind of like this, one thing after the other. And there were a few people in there who kind of got lost. They couldn't remember people's names, or they didn't know how to get in contact with them. So I couldn't, include them in the documentary. I actually couldn't fit everybody in the documentary.
Because it's only 35 minutes
It's only 35 minutes. So I kind of, focused on like the main hosts who were there like every week. But there were a lot of, guest hosts or people that came in on the interim or, so it was just doing that and then contacting the people and seeing if they would do an interview, if they were interested. Everybody said yes.
Oh, that's nice.
They were excited to, be a part of it. So,
quick sidebar. You're kind of giving the length of time for these previous hosts, and I'm thinking about when you started with KFAI, and then when did you become a host on Fresh Fruit? Because you might be in the running for longest host.
I think I am the oldest host on Fresh Fruit.
Hey, congratulations! Well, longest. I didn't say oldest.
Yeah, I said that, but yeah. I mean, I think I took my exam. I'm trying to think what my very first show was. It was not long after that, probably at 4 or 5 months, maybe.
Okay.
And then I started to, I took the tests.
Yeah,
and,
you forgot to include this in your documentary.
Yeah, and I had an earlier co-host too. Audrey Guest was my very first co-host. Again, I met through Lee, and he was an African-American man. And we just really hit it off and got along very well as co-hosts.
Yeah.
I like having a co-host, actually. But then he decided to move to New York. Something came up and he left, and then
Sure, we do that a lot.
Lee suggested John Townsend to me, so then we became co-hosts together. That's a very good question. When was my very first solo show? I should look that up. I don't remember exactly, but I was really nervous.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's always the test, You can watch things and people can tell you things and show you things, but when you're there by yourself, it's sink or swim, so.
Well, you swam and you're still swimming. So
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, so you got these contacts and everyone interviewed you, but you also did some work with the Treader Collection.
Yeah, I
you
did.
mentioned.
Right.
So what was that like?
Well, since Gary Peterson's the one that told me that he had donated some tapes, and this was cassettes.
Oh, gotcha. The
at
tapes
time.
were in the collection.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I found out about that. And I'd kind of heard about the Treader Collection before, but had never really been there. Yeah. So that was my opportunity. I contacted them. And at the time, Gene was still there.
Oh.
So Gene Treader was actually the curator when I started this documentary.
But you can't check anything out.
You
and
can't
it's
check
tapes.
anything out.
So you have to go and you were just listening there?
You can take your audio equipment and record it there.
Oh, okay.
If it is the property of the people who donated it. So since it was KFAI's, donated
Gotcha.
KFAI's, I could go to the Treader Collection and record things from those archives
Gotcha.
for my use in the documentary. Sometimes they might charge a fee, or there might be, you have to get a permission to use things like that. But in this case, I was allowed to do that. And there were a lot of tapes to go
I imagine.
through. Yeah.
Well, what did you discover? What did you pull from the tapes?
What I pulled from the tapes is I pulled a few of their like show announcements, welcome to Fresh Fruit, the weekly gay radio show or whatever.
Yeah.
Which it was kind of, they were still calling it gay radio show, gay and lesbian at that time. So it wasn't really a few years later when people started saying, bisexual, transgender, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it included everybody. And I pulled part of an interview that Claude and Gary did with Quentin Crisp.
Okay.
You know Quentin Crisp?
I don't.
Oh, okay. He's a very iconic gay actor,
Oh, wonderful.
British. And he was in town. I don't remember why they said he was in town, but he went to the studio live there.
Ooh.
And this was at the time when KFAI started out in the belfry of the Walker Church.
Okay.
So you had to climb up all these
Oh my
stairs
gosh.
to get into the belfry. And it was a very small room. It really was like if you get more than like 2 people in there, it was really tight.
Okay.
So, but Quentin Crisp, they said, came right up the stairs to do the interview. And he was in his 80s at the time.
Oh, wow.
And, he has a very dry wit to him, and very, kind of talking like, hello, that kind of,
Oh, sure.
And so I pulled a clip of him talking about some of his experiences, and I thought it was a long interview, but I just picked a clip of that.
That's right. I believe it's about how formal he addresses people or
Right,
something
yeah.
like that. It just kind of became his thing.
Yeah.
So how could you give us a guesstimate of how many tapes there were?
Gosh.
Or how long you spent listening to the tapes? Because you're kind of like a repository of like all fresh fruit information
Yeah.
now.
I couldn't, there was no way I could sit and listen to all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Gary had most of the shows that he did over the years.
Yeah.
He was there for like eight and a half years, I think. What I did was I kind of went through, he had them labeled. He was very well organized. Thank you, Gary. And so they were organized, by year, and then some of them said what was on the tape.
Okay.
Some of them didn't. So I would have to like skim through and just kind of look around. And, I'm sure I spent at least 10 hours going through the various
Yeah.
tapes and stuff like that. So,
And then when you were interviewing the people who you were able to reach, who all agreed to be interviewed, were those like hour-long interviews as well?
They
2
were
hour long?
pretty close to that. I would say there might have been one that was as short as 30 minutes, but most of them were at least around an hour.
And then somehow you had to fit all of this into a 35-minute audio
Right.
documentary.
Yeah.
And people's lives took some twists and turns over the course. From what I was hearing, some people had changed their names, and the like. How did you choose what you were going to keep and what was going?
Good
what was not
question.
going to make it?
That's a really good question. Well, after I started collecting stuff, I thought, since I only have this certain amount of time, I'll go chronologically. So, I started to select, I had to divide like the 30 minutes into what I decided would be 4 sections, like 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
Okay.
So that's how I kind of did that. And I wanted to make sure I got the very early stuff in there because that's the stuff that people never even heard about.
Right.
From the early 70s, how it got started, and, what people did. What was the show like when it started, right?
Yeah.
They had a turntable and a mixer, and a couple of mics,
Wow.
which, it's not too far off that right now.
Okay.
But, it was just compared to what we have today with all the technology and everything.
Yeah.
And, it just goes to show you radio can be done in all kinds of ways, like ham radio people are out in their trucks doing stuff. So, and today, now, with the technology as it is, everybody's doing a podcast and, yeah.
Yeah.
And, but then, it was interesting. It was a community radio station and all these people volunteered to do all this stuff. So,
Well, what was your favorite part about this documentary?
well, I do think it was about hearing about the early years, about what they went through and how it got started. Just some people looking for a project to do, and one guy's at the co-op and, oh, look, somebody's starting a radio station. Hey, should we try a radio show?
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah, they'll let us do a gay radio show. All right, But they were also talking about, it was a very different time and it was very turbulent.
Yes.
And there was so much more vitriol than there is now. There's still vitriol, but I mean, it was, you could still get arrested for just, really simple things like, not so much the cross-dressing wasn't quite as bad, like women could wear slacks and not get arrested in the 70s, but.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but.
I'm like, that wasn't that long ago, Dixie.
I know. But, they were all activists and really into what those changes that were going on, Like even Gary mentioned, there was a time when the men and the women, the, gay and lesbian parts of the community were not together.
Yeah.
And, there was that kind of stuff going on. And everybody started to come together in the 70s because there was all of this, vitriol and it was just a time of change. People were feeling some of the things that happened in the 50s and 60s to help that. The Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis that started in the 50s, helped bring about what people were doing in the 60s and the Stonewall riot. That didn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So,
when I was listening to the documentary, and maybe some of this is just on the cutting room floor, I did not get the sense that a lot of the initial hosts, the earlier hosts, kind of thought that what they were doing was brave. I kind of got the energy that you said, oh yeah, let's do a radio show. Mm-hmm. But then maybe it was the Anita Bryant coming to Minneapolis thing that changed it, because they were like, oh, we're the only ones covering this anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ personality. We're the only queer perspective covering this subject matter from our perspective, because that's not mainstream.
Right.
And it's really incredible that they were able to, in my view, engage in this brave act with some courage and leave this really lasting legacy. And I really love that you were able to piece this together so that we can honor them and lift them up in this way.
Yeah. I think that they were all activists. So I think that they did know what they were doing was important.
Good.
I think they definitely felt it was important. And everybody that I talked to felt that, the importance of queer media, it can never be underestimated.
Yeah.
So, keeping those stories alive and telling people what is going on, from a queer perspective, is very different than hearing it from some kind of a straight tabloid.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ask you straight up. Why is queer media important?
Well, that's it. It's making sure that people's experiences in the queer community are told from a queer perspective, and doesn't always have to be super serious or, we have our campy side.
Yes.
But on the other hand, we don't want to get, pigeonholed into just being the campy folks,
Yeah.
And it is important because the way that it's portrayed, even today, like I said, I really enjoyed what I heard from the 70s, but today we're still having the same issues.
Yes.
As are all the communities of color. And when does it end? You know? And it just goes on. And so I think that's just part of our experience.
Do you draw a distinction between queer media and queer representation in media. So for instance, the gay character that's usually a sidekick in a rom-com, let's say, versus RuPaul's Drag Race. Mm-hmm. They're both kind of funny.
Right.
They're both kind of campy. But I do think that RuPaul's Drag Race kind of comes with more of a message. At least in the beginning it did. Maybe things have commercialized a little bit since then. But there's kind of a point that the way we treat women doesn't really make any sense. Mm-hmm. Like this is what your expectation of a really successful, beautiful woman is, and it's completely made up.
I know.
It's a matter of makeup.
50s we go.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when you get into the entertainment business, you are in a totally different land. And, you'll get a few of the LGBT characters. Today it's changing a little bit, folks who aren't necessarily super stereotypical, that, can really speak to something that might encourage perhaps a young queer person who's watching.
Yes.
And so that they don't feel like they have to necessarily be pigeonholed into being one way or the other. Whereas, back when I was growing up, we had, Flip Wilson was out there, who I definitely loved. But, he did his lady dancer that he always did, Geraldine. And Milton Berle before him, who's always, but you had these people dressing in drag on TV.
Yes.
And, as a person who, didn't have any knowledge of the queer community at large, I was like, oh, so this is a guy in a dress.
Right.
I mean, it totally didn't affect me at all.
Yeah.
But today some of those are getting backlash. It's like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that because then you are, you're giving women a bad thing, or trans people are getting, feel degraded by it. And so, so our visions are changing in that way,
I kind of heard a distinction between the media you produce and queer entertainment media. And I, without assuming that yours is, it may be less entertainment, a little bit more serious, I do feel as though I take your work a little bit more seriously than I take the work of some other queer media producers.
Well, I think that the difference of being able to have, let's say, a queer radio show, or something that's exclusively, engaged in queer perspective, is that, we are a community radio station.
Yeah.
And so in the back of our minds is always education and social justice. And so people can come on the show and just feel completely free to talk about anything in their queer life that they want to. They don't have to say, well, I live with my friend.
Yes.
Now they can say, my partner, my wife or husband. But where in some places, even today, you still have to use friend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or, people who have a book that has the word queer in it, or a song that has the word queer in it. You're not going to hear about that on mainstream media.
Yeah.
Unless there's something very, very special about it. They don't even want to say the word queer hardly, although it's people are using it a little bit more. So, yeah, go ahead. What?
I would say, especially in this time when curriculum is being, let's say, cultivated to fit a certain narrative, when there is anti-LGBTQ legislation being pushed all the time. It actually is incredibly important that we have a space, a long-running authoritative space for community where people can come together and really talk about what the experience is in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though on my section I talk a lot about arts and entertainment,
Yeah.
We also bring in politics. You know, the other shows, that's why we have a wide variety.
Yes.
You know, we cover politics and, you know, drag and trans and all kinds of perspectives, you know, BIPOC, everything. So that, you know, people have that wide variety to listen to.
Yeah.
And I do like to focus on the arts for the most part. But you know, I've had some very interesting interviews with political people too.
Oh.
You know,
Okay.
and or homelessness. We did a whole section on queer homelessness at one point. And people, you know, or even just youth
Yeah.
homelessness is a big issue. So
Well, that could be a whole segment. We could have a long conversation there for sure, especially at the intersection of LGBTQ community and public health. But for now, let's take a coffee break.
okay.
And then when we get back, I want to talk about queer history and media just a little bit before I let you go for the day, okay?
Okay.
Okay. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Kathy Flaminio, and I'm the CEO and founder of Move Mindfully. And we are a training and consulting company that brings the science of mindfulness, movement, and social emotional learning into simple trauma responsive practices that are used in schools, hospitals, juvenile services, corporate and daycare settings, and even in the home. When we think about what is mental well-being, I think we have a clear understanding after living through a global pandemic with heightened uncertainty and not feeling safe. We learn the great impact it has on our nervous system. Here at Move Mindfully, we teach these simple tools to help our mind and body feel at ease and feel safe so we can connect to others. And when we think about mental, physical, and emotional well-being, we think about having a regulated nervous system. What excites us at Move Mindfully is we have created programs that are workshops, trainings, residencies, family nights, in which we go through our simple breathe, move, rest signature practice. So creating simple visuals like this that allow our adults and youth to know, like, what strategies would I do if I'm tired, or if I have high energy, or if I'm feeling anxious. Both as adults and children, we're able to create a culture of safety where people can learn and heal. We are so grateful that our initiative with Move Mindfully has really been able to expand, not only into schools and districts, but counties, hospitals, and juvenile services. And we've been able to do this through our partnership with Minnesota Thrive and Minnesota Department of Health and Minnesota Department of Education, through these state health improvement grants that really focus on physical health, emotional health, and mental health. And through these simple tools, we're able to provide both the adults and the youth strategies so that everyone can thrive.
I don't like spinning.
Working out? It's hard when your schedule's as busy as mine.
Cooking is not my thing, it's boring. Nope.
Disgusting.
I knew I needed to make a change.
I knew we needed to make a change.
I knew I needed to make a change.
You know how I got healthier? Not cooking.
I switched up my order and I walked to and from the restaurant.
In the morning, I get my work done. At night, I put my work in.
We still don't like eating vegetables. But it turns out we kind of like drinking them.
Improve your heart health to your own beat. LiveToTheBeat.org.
You are watching Bottomless Coffee with Jerome, and we're talking with Dixie Treichel from KFAI about the audio documentary Fresh Fruit, 35 Years of Queer Radio. we're talking about queer media. And I am really interested in continuing this conversation. Why does the history of queer media matter?
Well, I think it falls into the category of preserving queer culture and preserving our voices that otherwise would totally disappear. And so it's another form of, visibility. It's one of the things that I took away from knowing Gene Tretter.
Yeah.
Is that he really believes there is such a thing as queer culture. And when Gene started collecting, people thought he was nuts for saying that.
Yeah. Just for saying that there is such a thing as queer culture?
Oh, yeah. People didn't even want to admit that.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So, there was a time that we were people wanted to just keep us invisible and not even worry about it.
So dehumanizing.
Yeah. So, by saving the queer history or going into, with any other history, any community or people's experiences of life, it does matter because it tells us what happened as time progressed, what's changed, what hasn't changed, what we need to change and so on and so forth. So I think that's definitely the importance of that.
I completely agree. And even as you're speaking, I'm trying to think of in my experience over the years, how has queer culture changed? How have I interacted differently with the culture and throughout my different phases of life? And it is tough to keep up. Obviously, the biggest thing that's happened in our lives recently is COVID. And I think about how the queer community responded during that time. I have a background in public health. It was positive. Everybody, we were good. We got vaccinated. We wore our masks. For a lot of my friends, it feels like that was the aim of that was to get back into community. It was let's all get vaxxed. Let's all do what we're supposed to do so we can go back to normal, but not necessarily heteronormal. Let's go back to being able to congregate in homes and in bars and really be in that close community.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I'm also remember experiencing the AIDS situation, the AIDS crisis as well, which was, just devastating.
Was that covered in the tapes at all?
Yeah, they do talk about it a little bit in the 80s and 90s. In the 80s, it had just kind of started. Gary and Claude and John and, all of the Fresh Food hosts of the 90s, for sure, were talking about the AIDS crisis because it had gotten to the point not then where people were dying all over the place.
Yeah.
The 80s, it had just started. People weren't quite sure what it was. Like some of my friends who got AIDS in the early years, they just called it brain cancer or whatever. They didn't even know what it was.
Yeah.
But by the 90s, it was full blown and it was, people were terrified, but it brought people together.
Yeah.
Which I think the COVID situation has also.
I agree.
It's maybe not necessarily an exclusive, queer community experience. Like the AIDS wasn't exclusively queer either, but it was predominantly queer.
Yeah.
And, COVID has touched so many more people. So I think in any of that kind of a situation where there's a crisis like that, people will pull together in ways that they wouldn't have even thought of before.
And I believe that KFAI has been pretty active in educating people about COVID and maybe even distributing vaccines.
I don't know if they've distributed vaccines.
Okay.
But I'm sure that they, definitely, we have, COVID rules that people have been following and, cleanliness, sanitization.
I think you air PSAs as well.
There's a lot of PSAs and there's a special grant that the Minnesota Department of Health has given KFAI, to do stories about people's experiences.
Yeah.
With
COVID.
With COVID.
Yeah.
And And so that's been, they've been number one right on top there. And I've had people, who I've invited to participate in that project with me.
Yeah.
And you're one of them. And a couple of other people who I've interviewed, it's so important. Again, here we have this information about people's experiences being brought out to the community for other people to hear, so that there are people that are still afraid of it.
Yeah. Oh, very much so.
Yeah. And so it's really important that they get to hear that there's other people in their community that, are handling that and have ways to work with it. And there's places that they can go to find out information and, things like that. So,
I don't want to re-traumatize you, because you did mention people who you lost to HIV and AIDS. But recently, the queer community has been grappling with monkeypox. And I'm in some conversations with the health department on how to communicate to people that, if you're out there having sex, you are at risk for monkeypox, and you really need to, almost do a full physical exam of whomever before you engage in sex, but at the very least, know who you're having sex with, right? Mm-hmm. But the tension in the room was, okay, well, how do we make sure we're not stigmatizing people, but also giving them the actual guidance, like the best guidance for them. And so having a queer media outlet is such a great communications channel for distributing that authoritative information in a community voice, since it's community that you have coming on and talking about it. So I just had that thought. It's like basically a plug, unsolicited plug for KFAI for Fresh Fruit.
Yeah, it's great.
As we wrap, I love this question. It's one of my favorites.
Okay.
What is one thing that you want to make sure people take home from our conversation today, Dixie?
I think that one important thing is that queer media has a queer voice. And I think it's really important for people to hear about people's experiences in the queer community from a queer perspective. And, if you're an ally or you're not a queer person, that doesn't mean that you can't understand anything. It just means that you're getting to hear it from a perspective that's, authentic to the person who they're talking about.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. I love hearing people talk about their various communities. Yeah. So, even if I don't belong to that community, I think it's really interesting to hear it from their perspective, in their voice. And I think that's what I'd like people to be aware of today, and hope that they enjoy that as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Everybody, listen to KFAI, listen to Fresh Fruit. I might get to be a guest host. We'll see. Thank you, Dixie. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been wonderful.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot, Jerome.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm Jerome Evans, and this has been Bottomless Coffee with Jerome. You can find out all about us and stream some of our episodes at bottomlesscoffeeshow.com. See you next time.